dedication to serving American Indian students in North Carolina is deeply appreciated. Before we proceed, I would like to remind each of you that the session is being live streamed on YouTube, and we warmly welcome our online listeners who are joining us. Dr. Silver, may we get a roll call?
Yes, ma'am. When I call your name, if you just quickly unmute and acknowledge that you are here. Ms. Dorothy Stewart Yates. Ms. Dorothy, could you just unmute?
Yes, Dorothy Yates here.
Gotcha. Mr. Calvin Locklear.
Calvin Locklear here.
Mr. Jeremiah Moore.
Here. Good morning.
Good morning. Ms. Rhea Jacobs.
Present.
Thank you. Ms. Stacy Lynch.
Present.
Representative Lowry. Ms. Amanda Frazard.
Present.
Ms. Brandy Jacobs.
Present.
Mr. Rodney Jackson.
Present.
Ms. Cameo Lanning. Dr. LaRonda Lowry.
Present.
Ms. Angelique Young. All right, did I miss anybody? All right, you have a quorum, Madam Chair. You may proceed.
Thank you, Dr. Silver. Our first item is the approval of today's agenda. We have before us the agenda. May we get a motion to adopt the agenda as printed?
I make a motion we adopt. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ms. Dorothy.
I make the motion to accept the agenda.
And I will second that. This is Calvin Locklear.
Thank you. Those in favor, say yes.
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 Any opposed? So moved. I trust that everyone has had the opportunity to review the March minutes. May we get a motion to approve the March minutes?
Rodney Jackson.
Stacy Lynch.
I make a motion we approve March minutes.
I second March minutes. Stacy Lynch.
Thank you. Those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? So moved. Thank you, guys. Our first presenter today is Ms. Karen Fairley, Executive Director for Safer Schools, with a presentation on statewide discipline data. Welcome, Ms. Fairley. Thank you for joining SACE today.
Thank you for having me. I am going to go ahead and attempt to share my screen for my presentation. If you'll give me 1 second here. And if someone will let me know if that has been successful.
It is. We can see it.
Okay, great. So I was asked to share the consolidated data report that I gave to the the state board, in March of 2023. And so this is a condensed version because it is a lengthy document. And so definitely I will talk and give you the talking points on the slides as was presented to the state board. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to stop me. And so let me hold on a second here because you guys got this little box in the way of my words. Okay, so the statutory requirement is that the state board monitor and compile the annual report, and that I give that annual report to the General Assembly, the Joint Legislative Education Oversight Committee, by March 15th. So the Center for Safer Schools moved to DPI in 2016. 16. And so from 2017 forward, it has been our responsibility to get this done. And so this consolidated data report addresses the strategic priority of goal number 1 in the State Board of Education strategic plan, eliminate the opportunity gaps by 2025. And the objective is decrease the number of exclusionary discipline practices by subgroup. And objective number 4, decrease the high school dropout rate for each subgroup. And so the Center for Safer Schools, if you are not aware, were formed out of an executive order for then Governor Pat McCrory. And that was done 10 years ago, and it was in direct response to the Sandy Hook tragedy. And so our duties as the center is, as what you see on your screen, pretty much to provide training and professional development, technical assistance, resources, collect, analyze, and disseminate data, and work with the districts and charters. And so the data report that you'll see today consists of these things that here, and I'll go through each of them, and I won't go over this list now for the sake of time. But however, one of the cautions that I am going to give you prior to my presentation is that you will notice that there is a serious drop in 2020 and 2021, the second row from the bottom, and that is due entirely to the pandemic and the children not being in school. So I say that because in 21-22, you'll see a sharp percentage increase. But the increase is based on the fact that there was such a decrease the previous year. So what we did for this 21-22 year is compared it to the last year pre-pandemic, which was the 18-19 school year. So when I start talking about comparison, it is going to be to that pre-pandemic year because the actual years of the pandemic were very ambiguous as it relates to actual attendance. So in 21-22, there were 217,928 short-term suspensions statewide. And that is a suspension rate of 146.57 per 1,000 students enrolled. There were 120,668 individual students who had received that 217,928 short-term suspension in the 21-22 school year. Here we see that Black students with disabilities, and American Indian students had the highest rate of short-term suspension in 21-22 because of your group, the Indian Education Committee. I believe that your biggest concern is to look at the American Indian, which is number 3 as it relates to short-term suspension as a subcategory with 242.84 per 1,000 students. And you see that that is over the average state rate. The dotted lines indicate the state rate. You also see that in 21-22, the male rate is more than double the female rate. So the rate of suspension per 1,000 enrolled, you see the males at 196.66 over the females 90.69. As you break that up into race and ethnicity, again, you see that the American Indian is 242.84 84 short-term suspension per 1,000 enrolled. And this is by the grade level, and we see that the highest rate of suspension is in our middle schools. Long-term suspension and expulsion. So in 2021, 693 long-term suspensions were reported. And that should be 21-22. I apologize for that. I don't know how that is. The long-term suspension reported 21-22 were assigned to 685 individual students. If we look at it by long-term suspension, male students received more long-term suspension than females in 21-22. The rate of long-term suspension for male students was 64.60 per 100,000 male students enrolled, and was 2.41 times the rate for females. Pacific Islander students had the highest rate of long-term suspension per 100,000 students, followed by Black students and male students. And here you see that the American Indian students was in one of the lower percentiles at 12.54 per 100,000 students. We see here long-term suspension rate by sex groups in 21-22. And again, the male group supersedes the female group more than 2 times. Long-term suspension rate by race ethnicity. This is the rate. And you see the American Indian rate is 12.54 per 100,000 students. Our long-term suspension rate by grade level, we see that high school had the highest long-term suspension rate. Remember, middle school had the highest short-term suspension rate. Annual report of suspension and expulsion. There were 48 students who were expelled over the 21-22 school year. Of the 48 students expelled in 21-22, 64.6% were Black, 18.8% were white, 14.6% were Hispanic, and 2.1% were 2 or more races. We see that the American Indian population had 0 expulsions. There was no reported use of corporal punishment across the state. Now, when we talk about reassignment for disciplinary purposes in school suspension, in 21-22, North Carolina Public Schools assigned 216,530 in-school suspensions of a half day or more. And that was assigned to 112,399 students. Black students, students with disabilities, and male students had the highest rate of suspension. You see that for your purposes, your focus, the American Indian had a rate that was a little below the state rate. They did not rate as high. I guess Asian population had the lowest rate. Annual report on reassignment for disciplinary purposes by grade level, and middle school had the highest rate. As we look at the ALPs, reassignment for disciplinary purposes, alternative learning programs schools placement as disciplinary action. In 21-22, schools reported 4,000 assignments of students to alternative learning programs for disciplinary reason. The rate of placement was 2.69 placements per 1,000 students enrolled. Black students, American Indians, and students with disability had the highest rate of alternative learning placement as a disciplinary action. And so here you see that the American Indian had a rate of 5.08 per 1,000 students. The ALPS placement as a disciplinary action affected the middle school grades more than the other. So not by a whole lot over the high school, but there a little bit. So then we come to the dropouts. North Carolina public school dropout, 11,711 dropouts in grades 1 through 12. This is a 17.2% increase from the 9,991. That was the pre-pandemic year. Remember, we're doing pre-pandemic year for comparison. North Carolina reported 10,841 dropouts in grades 9 through 13. And the high school dropout rate was 2.25 dropouts per 100 high school students. And when we look at the annual dropout rate, we see that the rate for American Indians was 3.46, which was number 2 after students with disability. And the count, however, was 174. And so that is the summary of it. If you have questions or anything that you want to talk about, we can definitely do that. I don't know if you have things in the chat because I can't see that. I guess I could stop it and then maybe I can see it.
Chair Locklear, this is Olivia. I do have a quick question.
Yes.
Thank you, Karen, Dr. Fairley, for the fine presentation. I always enjoy your coming before the State Board of Education with your data. It is truly data, lots of it. A couple of questions. I'm assuming that regardless of the category, in school, out of school, expulsions, those are duplicated counts, aren't they? In other words, every time a student those aren't single counts. They're duplicated.
Well, I don't know about duplicate, but one child could have more than one incident.
Right, that's what I mean.
Yes. So one child, yes. There were a couple of times where I said that this affected, it may have been a number and it affected that many students. Mm-hmm. That's because, little Johnny might have had 3 suspensions. Right. Yeah.
Exactly. And then my other question, in your data, is it possible to identify where the American Indian data are concentrated region-wise?
Oh, could we pull it from the region? We probably can, yes.
That would help.
Yeah, so we can pull it from the region. We don't because that's not what's asked, but yes, we could do that.
And the reason I ask is because there's so few American Indian students percentage-wise to the whole population. It would be good to know where do we find the concentration of the issues with respect to the American Indian student.
Okay, yes. We can.
And I'm sorry, I just have a long list of questions. I'm sorry, I have a couple of others, if I may, Chair Locklear.
Absolutely. Please proceed.
And so my next question is, there is thinking, it's our general assumption that the reason kids sometimes stay in trouble in school and have to be sent out of the classroom to wherever is somehow related to the race of the teacher. That I know that has some truth in it, but I also know that could be too generalized. I know this probably isn't a statutory requirement in your report, but I would certainly like to see a deeper dive into with respect to the American Indian students. Are they being referred by American Indian teachers, or is there a high percentage of those kids not referred by American Indian teachers? Am I making myself clear?
You are, Ms. Oxendine. And Dr. Ox, let me say this about that situation. I have been the executive director since January of 2021. And so it hasn't been a little more than 2 years. And what I know is that I don't think that it's a specific teacher race versus student. I think it's a culmination of a lot of things. I think it's a culmination of what goes on in the community, what goes on in the household, what goes on with the children as it relates to their ability to act in a certain way in class, coupled with the teacher. I don't think that it's fair to point out any one reason. I think it's a culmination of a lot of issues that are beyond, and you've heard me say this before, Dr. Oxendine, beyond the state board or the General Assembly's ability. I think it has a lot to do with a whole lot of things that our children are exposed to that they previously weren't. And so, and hence the internet and social media and the TikToks and all of the other things that kind of glorify a certain type of behavior. I am a big proponent in having behavioral threat assessments done in school to focus on supporting that child and addressing the behavior. I don't care the race, I don't care the gender. It's about focusing on the behavior. And I think that sometimes the teachers just happen to be of a different race, but not necessarily are they picking on the children, for lack of a better term, because of it. I think, again, it has a whole lot of other things to do. And one thing, Dr. Oxendine, I must say that I think it has to do is what our children see, how we interact with each other when we have issues among ourselves.
Right. I appreciate that. You do such a fine job with this initiative, with your program, and I'm happy to. I didn't know wasn't all that clear on the history behind it. I had no idea that it was a relatively young organization, but thank you so much for those clear answers.
Yes, ma'am. Anytime.
Chairwoman Locklear, if it's okay, I'd also like to make a point, please.
Please proceed.
Hey, so thank you so much, Ms. Fairley, for the presentation. I just had a few questions and a few things I wanted to bring up that I think would be important in regards to that presentation. But I do feel like race is an important factor and ethnic background does play a role. And the reason I say that in particular, I'm a principal at a middle school within the public schools of Robeson County. And my school demographic and collective is roughly 90% American Indian in terms of my students. But also the district itself is 50% indigenous. And the reason I think we have to push that a step further is because there are unique circumstances and cultural barriers here that people who may not identify with that group might not understand. So I would also say I think it would be important to include like the incident codes in those referrals, because, for example, when we get a referral and they're being referred for something such as disrespect, well, disrespect is subjective. And what do we actually internalize as disrespect? And how can there be a disconnect between the home community and the school community? So I would like to see that data in a different lens in terms of like what are the actual incident codes that are coming in or potentially being duplicated on certain students, because that's something that we could actually address in-house and have conversations about disrespect, how to put interventions in place to reduce those short-term suspensions, because what you may perceive as disrespect in my household may not be. So that could be a disconnect in terms of a cultural barrier and cultural language. So I think it's important that that would be a step that we would identify as well. And thank you for your time.
Yes, sir. And Mr. Moore, yeah, definitely, I'm not saying we shouldn't include race. I just don't think that that should be the only thing. Me being a mother of 8 Black daughters and 12 Black grandchildren, I get it. I understand. And I think that culture does play a role in it. But I also think that when we come to the school, how we act at home might not necessarily be the way that we should conduct ourselves in school, just with anything. The way I act at home is definitely not the way I conduct myself at work and or in a public setting. And so what we're trying to do is develop the best children to become the best adults that will fit into a society where they are responsible for their conduct. And so definitely we are, I have a staff person who does the data, who runs it for me, and her and I are going through and we're breaking down those codes as much as possible, because I do want to see if there's a trend. And you're right, disrespect is subjective in certain instances. But we're doing it so that we're hoping that we'll have it ready for Power School for this coming up year. But you won't see that data until the following year, because the data that you will see in March of 24 will be for the year we're in now. So you wouldn't see it until March of 25. We can pull some, but it's not as accurate because they get a longer time to, submit certain data, right? So it's not always as accurate if we give it to you like quarterly. We can, but it may vary by the end of the year with corrections and clarifications on what behaviors are, that kind of thing. So I just wanted to let you know that.
Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
Chair Locklear, I do have another point that I want to make.
Please proceed.
And it's so good to see Mr. Moore. Congratulations, Jeremiah. I had no idea that you are now in a principalship. You've done well since leaving the program at Pembroke.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I would like to posit not a hypothesis, but I'd like to posit probably a insight. And it goes back to the question that I posed to Ms. Fairley a few minutes ago. I would like to see a regional breakdown of data, because it is my belief that we're going to find a preponderance of discipline problems as it perks up in her report in my region, in the Sandhills region, where there is the critical mass of American Indian students. In the Robeson County, Cumberland County, Scotland County, Hoke County, and maybe scattered across the other counties like Anson and Richmond and Moore and so on and so forth. So I think that's where we're going to see the heavy core of data. And I would also attach to that statement, my belief is that we would find that a high percentage of American Indian students, or let's say an appreciable percentage of American Indian students who are referred to in-school suspension or out-of-school suspension or to an alternative placement, but specifically like the daily stuff that happens in school suspension, I would pose that the teacher who's making that referral is American Indian. The majority, not all. You're going to find some Caucasian teachers referring American Indian students, and you're going to find African American teachers referring. I'm not that naive to think that everything is an even match, Indian teacher, Indian referral. I'm not nearly that naive. But I do think that we will find an appreciable percentage of Indian students who are referred, and they may need to be referred. I'm not saying that the American Indian teacher's out of line by doing that, but I'm saying I think we're going to see that relationship. The bigger issue is to SACE and to American Indian educators, wherever you are region-wise, and wherever we have American Indian students enrolled in schools, is that we find answers to these issues around discipline so that our kids can stay in the classroom all day long, never be out of the classroom because of disruptive behavior. Because if that happens routinely, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times during the year, it's going to affect other things. Thank you, Chair Locklear.
Thank you, Dr. Oxenine. And that was my question. Thank you, Ms. Fairley. I would just like to follow up on Dr. Oxenine. So given this data, of course, we would like a solution. And so my question for the State Department of Instruction would be, what are we doing with this data to inform our instructional practices? So what are we doing to address our high rates of suspension? And what evidence-based instructional strategies are being implemented to actually support academic success and reduce the need for disciplinary action of American Indian students in North Carolina? So have we developed some best practices, some instructional practices to reduce this data for future reference?
So what I will say is, as it relates to the classroom management, that I leave that to the educators. My focus is more of the safety, and I know the discipline is in concert with the instructional part. But the Center for Safer Schools have started a few initiatives to address it. We have a student engagement group that will engage students, and these students will be our students who are our higher risk students. We will be trying to roll that out in a regional setting. I'm starting a parent engagement group that will start, and it will be 3 parents from each of the 8 DPI regions, 2 from the district and 1 from a charter school. And the purpose of that parent engagement is to get parents to help us support other parents as it relates to these issues. We feel that if you're, one parent to another, and if we do it regionally, they know the region, and we at the DPI, Center for Safer Schools, will help inform those parents that are in our parent engagement group so that they can be a voice and a liaison to the other parents and help those parents with how to properly advocate for your child, how to go through the grievance process in districts the proper way. Well, a lot of times I get parents who call the center and they have not went through the grievance process of the districts. They're not happy with the teacher and the principal. They come straight to us. And so we send them back and say, hey, there's a layer of other folk you need to talk to. You need to talk to your district safety director, depending on the issue, your superintendent, and your local board, because DPI knows that districts have a lot of autonomy, and we want to support that autonomy. So the center does not work against the districts in the charter. We would work to support. So we've started that. We have an EKG2 program that's rolling out in the fall, educating kids against guns and gangs. But the whole premise of it is choices, making choices. So we don't just focus on the guns and gangs. That's just the program, how we got the funding through the Department of Justice. But it is a 7th grade program, and it meets the 7th grade health standards. There's legislation in the Senate right now to expand it to the 9th grade. And what it happens is that the Center for Safer Schools will train the SROs in the schools, and then we will have them facilitated in the class for 2 reasons. Number one, the SROs should know their students. And number 2, we want to create that mentorship coaching appearance between SROs and students. SROs are not there to just police and be punitive. They're there to support the students, and they're not there for discipline. So another avenue is to train administrators and teachers on the best utilization of SROs, to not have them be the disciplinarians, because we want them to be one of those trusted adults that our children come to. We have that anonymous reporting system so that children are able, who, if they see something, say something, and we can get them the help that they need. By doing the behavior threat assessment, the Center for Safer Schools is going to have a mental health unit if legislation goes through. And with that mental health unit, they will monitor the behavior threat assessments to make sure our children, it's not punitive to the families, but that it's supportive, and that the children who exhibit behavior that may be harmful to themselves and others are getting the help that they need. I hope I answered your question. Sorry for the long response.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Fairley. Are there any other questions for Ms. Fairley at this time? Thank you for joining us, Ms. Fairley.
You're more than welcome. Thank you for having me. Have a great weekend.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Next on our agenda is Representative Lowry. He is unable to attend the meeting for today, and certainly wanted to send his regrets for not being here. He did send 2 quick updates. Those are that he does expect the HR 166 American Indians Graduating with Honor Act to be law before the upcoming graduation season, and also the director's positions should also be in the Senate version of the budget. So those were the 2 updates that were shared by Representative Lowry. So we will continue to move forward in our agenda at this time. So next on our agenda, we have our State Board of Education member for the Sandhills Education Region, our very own Dr. Olivia Otsenine. Dr. Otsenine, thank you for joining us to provide State Board of Education updates.
Oh, thank you, Chair Lady Locklear, and it's always a pleasure to be in attendance with Stacey at your quarterly meeting. Our last State Board of Education meeting was the biannual planning meeting, twice a year in the fall of the year and again in the spring. The State Board of Education goes into an extended day of meetings. And during that time, we spend time going deeper in discussions around critical issues facing education in North Carolina. So our spring meeting, which was held last week, was held on the campus of UNC Charlotte, a very beautiful campus in the kind of the northern part of the city of Charlotte. So we were there for 3 days. In the fall, in November, just to remind you, I hope that I've said this. If not, it's not a reminder, it's new information. The State Board of Education held its fall planning meeting on the campus of UNC Pembroke. So we were in Pembroke at my school for 3 days. What I want to do is I'm not going to go into lengthy detail because I'm not the expert in this arena, but I do want to highlight some legislation that came to the attention of the State Board of Education last week. I'll give you the reference number, the coding, the General Assembly coding for the bill, and you can certainly do a bit more research on your own just by Googling go to the North Carolina, the General Assembly website, and you can type in these codes, identifiers, and you can do a deeper analysis of these bills. The first one is SB. The SB stands for Senate bill. That means that the bill was introduced in the Senate, on the Senate side of the chamber. 263. It's also the House version of the bill. So it's the kind of piece of legislation that has two sources of origination. So Senate Bill 263 and then House Bill 336 is a Healthy Students, a Nurse in Every School Act. And this is really important because it will ensure that every school must, by law, assuming this becomes law, must employ a school nurse. And there has been about $100 million attached to that legislation in recurring funds. So that's huge because that will ensure that our kids who come to school and they're not feeling good, or they need to go sit out of the classroom for a period of time, or they have to call mom, dad, or a relative to come get them, there will be a school nurse. If this passes, and I have no reason to think that it won't, we'll have a school nurse situated in some health room in every school. I know across the state of North Carolina, every child has access to a school nurse, but that doesn't mean that access is on a daily basis. So this is really important, a very important piece of legislation. Okay, moving right along to another item. I think let's see, where are we? Yeah. Oh boy. Geez. I've lost my place altogether.
Chairwoman Locklear, if it's okay, I'd like to add a point to Dr. Olivia's point.
Please proceed.
Hey, I just wanted to say the school nurse conversation, that's been crucial. And we've seen a lot of support this year, but also, and I could be wrong on this, so this is also a question. I think ESSER funded the CNAs to come into the buildings to support as well. And so when the schools that share school nurses, we now have full-time CNAs throughout our buildings within my county in particular. And I'm not sure like what funding source is being used, but I want to say it's connected to ESSER, but that's been a huge support for our students as well. So if that's something that could potentially be mentioned, that's a huge asset to our buildings, is those CNAs that have come in as well.
Well, that's a very good point. Are you hearing me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm getting an echo right now. There's also a bill, if I can get back to my original spot, there is also a bill in the General Assembly that is going to allow registered nurses. I think heretofore there's been some stricter requirements about the credentials of who can serve as a who can serve as a school nurse. But there is some legislation that will allow a registered nurse, and that's really going to expand the pool of who can expand the pool and therefore increase the access to nurses. Oh my goodness, I am so sorry. I have lost my place. let me just talk through some of my notes then. There is also a bill in the General Assembly that is going to require the State Board of Education to establish requirements for computer science education. So that will make it a requirement for middle grades and high school students to take a course in computer science. And this is called House Bill number 8. So that is another bill that you might want to do additional research on. Another bill that is in the General Assembly pertains to the licensing of teachers. Now, I think this is House Bill 382. If not, I'll just have to correct that. But anyway, in a nutshell, currently there is a piece of legislation already in place that will allow a teacher, whether that teacher has passed all the state board licensing exams or not, it will allow that teacher to teach in a school district on what is called a limited license. Now, that heretofore has not been a renewable license. In other words, after a 3-year period, teaching on a limited license, that teacher would have to, during that window of 3 years, would have had to have completed all and passed all the state board licensing exams. There's a K-6 licensing exam. There's a secondary education. There is a license exam for special education. There's not a licensing exam for principals. But this limited license would allow that individual to teach on a limited license for 3 years. During that window of time, must take all and pass all the exams. Now, the new legislation is allowing that teacher to renew the limited license. In other words, if the individual has not passed the state board exams after 3 years, then that individual the individual would not do it, but the school district would do it, would request another 3-year period on a limited license. Now, you're probably saying, well, is that a good thing or is that not a good thing? Well, if you were a superintendent, you would probably see it as a good thing because there is a shortage of teachers in North Carolina. And depending on where the school system is located, let's say in the rural parts of North Carolina, the Northeast in particularly, and even to some extent in the Sandhills in my region of the state board, but particularly in the very rural parts of the state, there is a very troubling teacher shortage. So a superintendent would say, I still need this teacher. The teacher's doing a good job. And based on EVAS or based on your NESIS evaluations, therefore, I want to reemploy this person after 3 years. Now, I don't want to call it the negative side, but the alternative way of thinking about the limited license is this. Over time, let's say that the General Assembly comes back in 2 years and says, well, we renewed the limited license once before. Let's draft another bill and continue making the renewing process possible. Well, conceivably, we could end up in North Carolina with kind of a 2-tiered teachers licensure system. We could conceivably have teachers in classrooms based on the continuation of legislation that allows that limited license to be renewed. We could have a class of teachers that have never passed the North Carolina State Board of Education exams, and we could have another class of teachers who have passed, and maybe passed as soon as they graduated from college and before they even took their first teaching job, passed all the exams and was ready to go to a classroom in August after they finished college. So we could have two categories of teachers. The pay differentiation, however, there would be no pay differentiation, regardless of the classification you're in, whether you passed the exams, state board exams, or you did not pass the exams, that teacher would be paid on the same pay schedule. So that is another piece of legislation that will definitely already has traction, and it's being championed heavily by our superintendents around the state. Do you have any question about anything I've presented so far? Okay. Another piece of legislation that is on track to pass, I don't have the number for it, but it pertains to principal license. I'm so sorry that I've lost my place. I don't have the number for this piece of legislation, but what it does essentially is does not require a principal to pass a licensing exam. It also allows the non-classroom teacher to become a principal. Now, that individual must have a master's degree, must hold a degree in some area, undergraduate degree in some area of education before that person can enter a MSA, a principal preparation program. The person must have, like, for instance, a school social worker, a school counselor, because those are educated related areas and degrees. Those whether they have actual teaching experience is irrelevant to this piece of legislation. They do not have to have ever taught, and they do not have to have any of the other requirements that are associated with the classroom teacher. So that bill is on traction to pass. And that means that going forward, in North Carolina in the years to come, all principals will not have had classroom teaching experience, but they must have some related experience. Do you have any question about that legislation? And then the other, I'll end on this one. The other piece of legislation, I do have a number on it. It is Senate Bill 631, and it is titled Fairness in Women's Sports. So this one, let me just call it down to the bare basics. This bill will only allow students in a particular, it doesn't matter about the sport, on the basis of their biological sex. In other words, a boy who considers himself a girl will not be able to, let's say, play on the girls' basketball team or the girls' volleyball team. It's called Fairness, and the title of the bill is called Fairness in Women's Sports. So that might be one that you want to investigate, fairness in women's sports. And it really goes to the whole issue of the transgender issues that are now facing particularly our high schools in North Carolina. So this is going to safeguard women's sports. So if you've been in education as long as I have, you remember the passage of Title IX, which goes back to the 70s. And Title IX came about, the original version of Title IX came about to ensure that women had an equal opportunity to athletic sports and athletics in K-12 as well as at the college level. So that was the purpose of Title IX. that has Title IX is now undergoing kind of a lot of shifts because of recent trends in gender identity. So keep your eye on SB 631. So those are the updates that I have for SACY. If you have any questions, please open up the floor for just a minute or two if you have any questions or thoughts about these pieces of legislation.
Chairwoman Locklear, I have one question, if that's okay.
Please proceed.
Hey, I know I'm talking a lot, but Dr. Oxendine, thank you for that. PSRC, the schools that the computer science bill that we were talking about earlier, that would impact. We had a meeting earlier this week, and the way it was expressed to us, I just want to say if I could get some clarity or what is the language around the bill actually saying at this time.
Okay.
It wasn't clear if that would be funneled through like our science teachers or if that would be funneled through CTE, because there was the issue of like having the computer science licensure, and like our K-6 schools currently like don't have CTE teachers. So like, for example, I might have to provide CTE covers to other schools, maybe my feeder schools, but we could alleviate some of that if our science teachers could actually fulfill that requirement, or if they were willing to do something additionally for a stipend. So does the language around that bill now say that it has to be funneled through CTE, or is that still up for debate?
No, the legislation does not get that specific about how the requirements around computer science education, the standards have to be implemented at the local level. But I will say, your question is causing me to remember some discussion I had, maybe a question I raised when this topic first came to State Board several months ago. I want to think that it's going to probably be, it will reside somewhere between CTE and maybe even the math curriculum.
Got you. Okay.
I feel 99% sure that science teachers will not be impacted by this.
Got you. Thank you.
I can safely say that.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? I will end by saying I'm very, very angry with myself because I lost my notes. I mean, I have my notes, but I had something better to share with you, and they're gone.
It's fine, Dr. Oxendine. It's Friday. Thank you for your updates, and they're always informative, and thank you for your continued hard work on the State Board of Education.
Well, I appreciate that so much. I will do this. When I find the better presentation, why don't I send it to Dr. Silver, and Dr. Silver, maybe you can get it sent, or you could get it placed maybe on the SACY website.
Yes, that would be excellent. That's very helpful when we do the minutes. It's easier just to drop in you all's notes, so that'd be great.
Absolutely. Actually, it's the presentation to help you out a little bit, Dr. Silver. It's the presentation that Jamie Falconberry presented to the State Board.
Okay. I can pull that from the...
It's absolutely there. It's very thorough and very clear.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Oxendine.
I'm going to have to say goodbye to everyone, and have a wonderful weekend. It's beautiful weather, and I look forward to your next meeting.
Thank you, and likewise. And as Dr. Oxendine closes out, and we had this discussion on teachers, it is Teachers Appreciation Week, and I would like to say happy Teachers Appreciation Week to all our teachers. We certainly love our teachers, appreciate our teachers, pray for our teachers, and support our teachers in the great state of North Carolina. So thank you, and happy Teachers Appreciation Week to all of our teachers out there. Next on our agenda, we have Dr. Amy Ryan, the Director of the Office of Early Learning, joining us for a mid-year update for the Read to Achieve formative assessment. Welcome, Dr. Ryan. Thank you for joining SACY today.
Thank you, Chairwoman Locklear. It is my pleasure to be here, and I'm excited to share where we are, the progress we've made, even though we have plenty of work ahead. So at this time, if on the one thing I want to start with is, I'm sure you are aware, we have implemented LETRS professional development that was named in the legislation. And we are approaching the end of year 2, which really, I cannot believe we're already here. So cohort 1, the districts that signed up to be in cohort 1 are all finishing by the end of June. And that is ahead of schedule because they had until August with the extension because of the contract delay. But what we are noticing is not only are they ahead of schedule, but every other cohort is also either ahead of schedule or on track. And so that in itself is a success we want to share and celebration. And 15 of our districts out of 29 in cohort 1 have already completed their LETRS professional development. That doesn't mean we check it off. This is where we begin the sustainability and the coaching and the implementation. Just attending a training is just the beginning, but we are already seeing and reaping some of the benefits of what we are learning as a result of that focused and aligned training. So we have 44,000 plus educators that are now starting to speak the same language when it comes to teaching our children to read. So I'm going to go through some data with you, and you'll have graphs that we'll look at. When you see green, that is our national user base for students who are not at risk, and red is for students who are at risk, compared to gray, which will be North Carolina's data. So in the first data point graph or data graph that we have here, you will see that we have our beginning of year data for the national sample, which is representative of all 50 states in the Amplify database, compared to North Carolina's data. And so if you look at the light green, that is our beginning of year for the nation, the national sample, compared to the dark green, which is mid-year for the national sample. And then you'll also see our beginning of year for North Carolina in light gray, and then our mid-year in dark gray. And so if you look at kindergarten specifically, you'll see as a nation, our kindergarten students that use Amplify came in at 37% of those students not being at risk. And so they are on meeting benchmark. 28% in North Carolina were not at risk. But if you look at the growth at mid-year, the nation grew about 12 points, 12% from 37 to 49. And North Carolina grew from 28 to 54. We had a 26% gain from those foundational pieces as our kinder students are entering their first year in school if they had not attended preschool. And some have attended preschool, but that's just that first year. And of course, the sooner we reach those children, the better off we are to avoid at-risk behaviors later when it comes to literacy and learning to read. So in first grade, you'll notice there was an increase of only 1% in first grade from beginning to mid-year for the nation, and North Carolina increased 6%. Compared to second grade, only 2% for the nation and 5% for the state. And then no gains for the nation in third grade and only 1% for North Carolina. And the reason, as you probably know, but I don't want to assume, as the skills progress and get harder and we move from that word recognition side of the Scarborough's rope to language comprehension and those skills with fluency and vocabulary and applying that to text, it does get more difficult. Our third grade students missed at least a year and a half due to the pandemic. And so we see the missing those foundational skills, what happens to kiddos, which is why it's so important for us to reach them as soon as possible, because as the gaps get larger, you're having to decrease some core time to ensure you get some interventions for those children. So we're trying to make sure that we're doing both at this time, looking at annual growth and catch-up growth for all kids. And on the next slide, you'll see just the opposite for the most part of your students who are at risk. The nation for kindergarten decreased by 11%. And then, of course, North Carolina was by 26%. We decreased the number of at-risk students. And then for first grade, they increased. The nation increased by 1%, and North Carolina decreased. We went against that trend. And then second grade would decrease by 3% in the nation and 5% in North Carolina. And then we were comparable as far as the decrease to the nation, but we are below the 30% when you're 37% when you're looking at the national number of percent of students who are at risk in third grade. We are now at 33%. And all that to show, when I mentioned earlier, we have lots of celebrations, but you see here we have lots of work ahead. So let's look what's beneath the averages. Sometimes we get caught up in those averages, but we really need to dig in and not just assume that just because we have high averages that everything is hunky-dory. So if you look at our white subgroup from the nation compared to North Carolina, you will see that the nation increased 5% from beginning of year to mid-year, and then North Carolina increased 10%. We've doubled that. So we're at 63%, and we started at the same exact level for our white students, but we have increased and closed that gap more than the nation has done it with Amplify. For our Asian students, it stayed the same in the nation, and we increased at the state level at 3%. And then for our Black students, the nation increased 3%. We increased 7% in North Carolina. And then for our Hispanic students, you'll see the 5% increase for the nation, 7% for us, North Carolina. And then for our American Indian Alaska Native students, 2% increase for the nation and 8% for North Carolina. And again, this really tells a story about how much work we have to do. We want to celebrate the growth. That is important. Growth leads to proficiency. However, it is not okay to still be in 30 and 40 and 50 and 60%. On the next slide, you will see the same, just the opposite here of students that still need that intensive support. We have decreased more than the nation in each of these areas as well, with white being 3% compared to 7% decrease. Asian students increased by 1%, the at-risk students, and we decreased by 2%. And then you'll see the drop, -1 compared to -5 with our Black students, -3 compared to -7 with our Hispanic students, and -1 compared to -9 with our American Indian Alaska Native students. So not only did we take time to look at it from beginning of year to mid-year, we also wanted to look at what's happening from our kinder students to our first grade students across years. So if you look at the stars, and so on that light gray kinder graph, that bar, you will see we were at 47%, our kinders were last year. So those students now in first grade are at 54% when you go to first grade and you look across the years when you match the stars. And then if you look at our first graders who are now in second grade and match those yellow triangles, you will see we've increased 9% from first grade to second grade, whereas the nation increased 6%. And then if you look at the heart from second grade to third grade, there was no change for the nation, but we increased by 4%. So not only are we seeing increases from beginning to end, we are also seeing increases from year to year. That is important. So no matter how we're looking at the data, we are seeing that we are making gains, slow gains, and that's the direction we want to go here in year one of fully implementing science or learning about science of reading. And then, of course, we are hoping to continue that trend. And so you'll see the same here for our at-risk. If you look at the stars, you'll see 35% to 29%. Our at-risk students decreased by 6% compared to the nation of 1% across years. And then if you were looking at those triangles from 38% to 30% in first to second grade, so 8% changes there. I'm sorry. And then our hearts in second grade to third grade, we're looking at those symbols, decreased from 36% to 33%. So we are decreasing the at-risk students across grade levels, whereas the nation there increased by 2%. So we are once again going against the trend of what the nation was seeing with the Amplify users. So if you think back, last year, beginning of year from 21-22 to 22-23, we had over 28,000 less students who were below benchmark this year in comparison, which was about close to 28,000 more students who were at or above benchmark when we looked at beginning of year. But now that we're looking at mid-year, on the next slide, you will see now we have close to 30,000 students at mid-year who are actually it has decreased below benchmark, and we have almost 40,000 students now who are at above at or above benchmark in comparison to what happened last year. So we are seeing a larger increase of students who are at or above, and moving our students in the right direction to move toward proficiency. And I will take any questions.
Are there any questions for Dr. Ryan?
I had one question. Do we only have it broken down with the American Indian students in that one category?
For current data, yes. Our goal as we continue to dig into this data is to also look at that across cohorts, and even within this subset skills, as we continue to implement the science of reading and give our teachers some grace and space of learning that professional development. So our goal is to break that down even further as we continue to gather this data using our partners in SAS.
Are there any other questions? All right, Dr. Ryan, thank you for those most informative updates. Thank you for joining Stacy.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. So we are a little ahead of schedule. We can go ahead and take a 5-minute break and everybody return back at 11:20. So we'll do a 5-minute break and everybody return back at 11:20. Thank you. At this time, we will reconvene. If you will, just raise your hand in the chat if you're back. All right, we will proceed with our agenda. Welcome back from the break. Next, we welcome from the Office of Federal Programs, Alex Charles and Melissa Eddy. Welcome.
Thank you. So good morning, everybody. I'm actually flying solo today, so you just get me. I don't know if that's good or bad, but I'm Alex Charles. I am the Interim Assistant Director for the Office of Federal Programs. And I'm just glad for the invitation to be here today. I do bring greetings from our director, Dr. Latricia Townsend. Unfortunately, she could not make this meeting, but she does send her welcome and her regrets for not being able to make that. So today I just have a few updates from the federal program world. And then at the end, we'll definitely have some time for some questions if you should have any. So to begin with, let's talk about sort of what we're going to talk about today. And for one is just an overview of the ESSER program. We're also going to talk about some of the federal program updates that may be included with ESSA or any upcoming grant opportunities, and also just some wrap up and next steps. So let's begin with the ESSER discussion. So ESSER are our COVID relief funds. So these are the funds that were authorized from the federal government that came to North Carolina to help us sort of combat and emerge from COVID stronger. So these came in 3 waves of funding. So ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3. And those are the 3 waves of funding. And so with that, as you can see on the screen, that ESSER 1, that spending has expired. It expired this past year. So ESSER 1 is done, and we have already liquidated those funds, and it's no longer a part of the conversation. But ESSER 2 and 3 are still alive and well and active within the districts and charter schools. ESSER 2 does expire this September the 30th, 2023, and ESSER 3 expires the following September 30th, 2024. Both those funds do have a liquidation period, which means that if you encumber those funds, if you have them set apart, you have them earmarked, you have them like an open purchase order or something for those funds, that you do have until close to the end of January to spend that money down. But they do have to be encumbered by that September 30th deadline. And still, all spending must be linked to COVID. And this has become a little bit of a topic because the more we get away from COVID, the further we distance ourselves from the pandemic. And I think I even read a day or two ago that it's officially, they've declared the pandemic over. But with these fundings, this funding was given to combat COVID. And so that hasn't changed. So even though we are sort of emerging from that, we're still dealing with some of the repercussions that the pandemic caused. And so these funds do all have to be linked to COVID. And that's going to be either responding to or preventing or really just emerging stronger from COVID. So that's what the funding has to be linked for when you think about ESSER. With ESSER, we also got some more reporting requirements. And so with great money comes great scrutiny. And so with that, we have to fill out an annual ESSER survey to the Department of Education. That is a very lengthy survey. It gets down into the weeds of how the PSUs, the districts, spent their ESSER funding and looking at the requirements that were put forth and making sure that the districts as a whole are meeting those requirements. There's also an ARP, which is ESSER 3, a safe return to school plan. And I know we're saying, look, we're already in school, but at the time when the funding came, we weren't all in school. We were still in a virtual setting, trying to accommodate students, trying to educate, and trying to move forward in the midst of a pandemic. So they wrote this into law that every district school must have a return to school plan. It has to be posted on the website, has to be updated every 6 months. And even though now it's sort of a moot point, they still have to update it every 6 months to indicate what type of instruction they're providing. Of course, now it's in person. There still are some virtual schools out there, but most of the instruction now is happening in person. There's also a report that's called the Maintenance of Equity Report. The Maintenance of Equity Report was a 2-year reporting requirement, so it was last school year and this school year. The purpose of the Maintenance of Equity Report was to ensure that with the amount of funding that the districts received due to ESSER, that there wasn't a cut in funding from state and local. So in other words, they were trying to protect the districts from getting a cut state and local so that the ESSER funds truly could be supplemental and could be used to truly combat COVID and not just sort of maintain a status quo type environment. So taking a step away from ESSER, we now enter into what we call ESSA. ESSA is the main funding source or main grant that funds the federal funds, the ongoing federal funds for the state of North Carolina. So within ESSA, which was authorized back in 2015, you see the multiple titles there that are listed there that we oversee in federal programs. The main point of these funds is to remove barriers. They're to remove barriers in different ways. So with Title I Part A, that's going to be the biggest funding source and probably the one that most people are familiar with. That is generated based upon poverty. However, the barrier is set to remove is that educational barrier that sometimes gets put there because of poverty. So it really is looking at putting in structures and systems into place within the schools to help schools become successful, or school improvement is another way of saying it, is to help schools become better. Title I Part C is looking at our migrant students. So it's looking at our students who are traveling around following the agricultural calendar, and it's helping to remove that barrier that's incurred from being a student within a migratory family to help them be successful with education. Title I Part D is looking at our neglected and delinquent students. So our students who may either be in a residential facility due to neglected or delinquent situations that they may be in. And again, removing those barriers to the best of our extent. Title II is looking at how do we make teachers the best they can be. So again, trying to look at that student achievement, but looking at how do we make teachers the best they can be. Title III is looking at our English learner students and how do we begin to remove that language barrier to help them be successful. Title IV looks at it from a different perspective. It looks at it from how can we look at our program and remove the top barrier? So how can we begin to expand our programs out? How can we begin to add in maybe more of those STEM programs? How can we begin to strengthen our partnerships with the community colleges to help students have more opportunities within the school? And Title V is looking at the rural nature of some of our districts. So it helps to try to alleviate some of the unique situations that come about from certain districts and schools being very rural. So it's a very flexible pot of money that helps people address that. Now, we know when we talk about removing barriers that is an ongoing process. It's not something that happens overnight, and throwing money in a situation doesn't always help. But these funds are there to help schools and districts be strategic about that process of making sure that we are removing as many barriers as possible so that students can be successful. With that in federal programs, we also have to monitor. So again, with much money comes oversight. So we monitor every recipient of federal funds on a 4-year cycle. We do a risk assessment that sets that 4-year cycle. And then over the course of the next 4 years, we will go out in person and monitor those district schools for their use of federal funds. With this, even though these are what they call entitlement grants or formula grants, which basically means as long as you meet the definition, you get access to funds, there is still a requirement for an application. So the application is handled through CCIP. The fiscal year 24, which is the upcoming application, will open on June the 1st, and we will be doing a technical assistance webinar once we get the screenshots for what the new application will look like this month. So districts will be receiving that technical assistance this month. So looking ahead, what do we see for federal programs? We do see that the ones that we just talked about, the ones that are authorized through ESSA, they will be opening in June 1st with an application due at the end of August for those funds. But there are also some new funding opportunities. There's one that was just passed through Congress that is in North Carolina Stronger Connections Grant. And I apologize, there's a typo there. I will correct that for us, send this to Dr. Silver and get that there. But it's North Carolina Stronger Connections Grant. And what that's looking for is just looking at how do we look at the social emotional needs of our school. So it's looking at targeting the most impacted areas of our state and how do we begin to support them through some of that social emotional work for our students. So that will be going to state board this upcoming month for approval, and then it will begin to be rolled out to the state following that. This past state board meeting, we did have the 21st Century Summer Mini Grants that were approved. And we also have our McKinney-Vento, which helps out our students who are experiencing homelessness. So that grant is also rolling out at this time as well. So this time I do want to open up to where if there are any questions, I'll be glad to answer them to the best of my ability.
Thank you. Do anyone have any questions for Mr. Charles?
All right, well, I do want to mention one more thing before I just end, and that is we do, within federal programs, we have what we call committee of practitioners. And that is a group, a cross-section group from across the state from many different walks. So from, educators to non-educators, from just very representative of the state. And so we use that committee to pass ideas by and to pass grants by. And we're in the process of beginning to re-up that. It's time to elect some new members to that. So in this presentation, I'll be sending Dr. Silver to get out to this committee is a link that will lead you to our page. It talks about what that committee does, as well as an opportunity to indicate interest if you're interested in serving on that committee. We would welcome that. So with that, that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining Stacey. We appreciate your dedication to the Office of Federal Programs. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the invite.
Next on our agenda, we will hear Title VI updates from Mr. Rodney Jackson, the Indian Education Coordinator from Cumberland County Schools. Welcome, Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Dr. Locklear. First, Title VI Grant Part 2 will close today, Friday the 12th, 2023 at 11:59 p.m. If you are in the process of completing that grant, Part 2, you should get it done before midnight tonight. If you don't get it, if it's not completed by then, you cannot submit anything after tonight. Your Indian Parent Committee approval form must be submitted along with your Part 2 application. That form is a list of your parent committee that is required through your grant. Your bylaws must be submitted within 6 months of submitting your grant approval. Every Title VI, every 506 Title VI school district should have bylaws go along with what you're doing within your program. And the budget must be presented to your parent committee, at a parent meeting before it is submitted. And you have to advertise that through your local paper or through social media. Once the application has been submitted, no changes can be made. Department of Education may increase what you originally got. They can increase up to $5,000, but you can't. But you, as the person who submitted the grant, cannot make any changes to your application. Once your grant has been received, approved, you will receive a notice by the end of June or July, first part of July, electronically through the G5 Gov grant. Gov site, and they will tell you how much you actually got for your grant. That is all I have for the Title VI updates.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. We appreciate those updates. Next on our agenda, we have our very own Ms. Dorothy Crow bringing updates on behalf of the North Carolina Commission of Indian Affairs. Welcome, Ms. Crow.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Mr. Greg Richardson, the Executive Director of the Commission, apologizes for not being here to deliver his report, but this is a busy time for him, and he already had a commitment for this date. So he has sent me his notes, and I will gladly pass them on to you. The first item is the arts and crafts legislation. It is being monitored by several of the federally recognized tribal leaders to remove state-recognized tribes from the arts and crafts legislation. The commission wrote a letter in opposition to the elimination of the state-recognized tribes from the legislation and participated in a national listening session and spoke on the need to retain state-recognized Indians in the legislation. Commission members and tribes across the state also submitted letters to congressional leaders opposing the removal of state-recognized tribes from the American Indian Arts and Crafts legislation. If this legislation is adopted, state-recognized American Indians will not be allowed to display or sell their art and crafts as Indian made. So we will be following this closely. The June Commission meeting planning is now taking place. We have several agenda items of importance that includes the appointment recommendations from tribes and organizations to the North Carolina Indian Housing Authority. Additionally, the commission will have several of its commissioners with ends of terms, and the reappointment of commission members will be taking place. The commission has been busy with staff training conference. The conference was held this month. It included a review of the commission's legislation, bylaws, and committees, law literacy for advocates, creation of the MOUs and MOAs, grant resources, project procedures and guidelines, procedures for onboarding or offboarding staff, communications with diverse populations, and to review the e-procurement procurement rules and procedures, and some of the North Carolina Commission of Indian Affairs policies. We have a carry forward funding request. The commission requested carry forward funding for the Pandemic Recovery Coordinator 2 position and the state recognition of Indian tribes, along with general advocacy salary funds. The Native American Youth Conference will be held June 15th through the 17th on the campus of North Carolina State University. The commission is planning to sponsor up to 30 students to the NACNAO conference. The funding for the sponsorships will be allocated from commission funds, the Section 8 housing program, and the domestic violence and sexual assault programs. Funds have been allocated, but we have not received an invoice from NACNAO. So the payout is pending receipt of an invoice. which is a very good opportunity for students who may not be able to afford attending the NCNEO conference. So please share that with NCNEO if you know of students that may need help with this funding. The Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Proclamation was released by Governor Cooper this month and distributed to the commission members, tribes, organizations, Indian educators, and additionally, the following activities were conducted. Information was given out at Piedmont Community College Job Fair on Thursday, April 27th in the Saponi tribal community. An information table was set up at UNCP's Walk and Learn event on Monday, May the 1st within the Lumbee tribe. Information was presented and handed out at a healing circle on Thursday, May the 4th in the Saponi tribal community. Information was posted on the Saponi Facebook page and also included the request for Saponi tribal members to wear red on Friday, May the 5th for awareness in the Saponi tribal community. Also coordinating and participating in the Lumbee March in Pembroke on May the 5th in the Lumbee tribal community. An information session and a talking circle for people in the community that have lost loved ones was held on May the 5th in the Halawa Saponi tribal community. So we appreciate this awareness for missing and murdered Indigenous women. We had a presentation of the Order of the Longleaf Pine. It was presented to David and Sharon Crow at a community meeting in the new Snowbird Community Center in Cherokee on May the 2nd. Greg Richardson, the executive director of the commission, presented greetings on behalf of Governor Cooper. The ceremony and community meeting was attended by approximately 100 people, which included some of the children fostered and adopted by David and Sharon Crow. David and Sharon were presented the Order of the Longleaf Pine for serving as foster care parents for over 300 children over a period of 50 years. We have the National Congress of American Indians Mid-Year Convention that will be taking place June the 4th through June the 8th at Prior Lake, Minnesota. The executive director, Greg Richardson, and Secretary Cashwell will be attending the Saponi Youth Camp and Tribal Council meeting on June the 21st. Secretary Cashwell is scheduling appointments to personally appear in each of our North Carolina state recognized communities and also the communities of the Indian urban organizations. Lumbee Homecoming is being planned for July the 30th through June the 30th through July the 8th. So there's a lot of happenings taking place with our commission, and we appreciate the work of the commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dorothy. Do anyone have any questions for Ms. Dorothy? All right. Thank you for all you do for the Commission of Indian Affairs, Ms. Dorothy. All right, we will continue in our agenda. Next is the chairwoman's report. I have a few items. The SACE report was presented to the State Board of Education in March. Following the report, there were many media inquiries as it relates to the use of American Indian mascots and the House Bill 166 to allow American Indian students to wear the eagle feather at public school graduation ceremonies. And following the presentation, there was a lot of traction on the American Indian director position. I did respond to the Border Independent Belt and NPR, the North Carolina Public Radio. In the future, I would like for SACE to possibly consider publishing something on our website as it relates to the mascots. I did refer a lot of the media to our appendix in our SACE report as it relates to our mascots. But maybe if we could add something to our website, that would be great. So what are, for our discussion items, our plan for distribution and advocacy around the 2023 SACE report? It was approved by the State Board of Education. So we can develop a plan for distributing that within our individual counties and our tribes. Dr. Silver, will you be sending us that final report? I know the last one that I have still says draft on it.
So in the one that's if you refresh your agenda, I've linked it while we were meeting. So the first link, and then there's one at the bottom that should be the final one. So the draft should be removed.
Okay, thank you.
And Madam Chair, I'll we're in the process of adding it to the SACE website as well.
Okay, thank you. So we can certainly make sure that all of our Title VI coordinators have an electronic copy of the 2023 SACE report. Any other ideas around distribution and advocacy around the 2023 SACE report?
This is Dorothy Yates. Will there be any paper copies available?
So what we'll do is prior to the first quarter meeting, we will send out requests for paper copies, and members can request whatever amount they would like of hard copies of those documents, and we'll get those printed and have them available at that meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Silver.
And this is Dorothy Yates again. I would like to personally thank you, Chairperson Locklear, for your responses that you have made on behalf of SACE. I'm specifically referring to the Education North Carolina report. If any of you have not seen that report, it would be worthy of your time to read that. So thank you for your representation, Dr. Lockley.
Thank you, Ms. Dorothy. One of the things that I certainly want to add is, working at UNCP, one of the things that I've had the opportunity to do is present this report to our FATE scholars who are going into the profession of teaching. I've also had conversation with some teachers in Robeson County, and even some principals. And guys, they don't know that this report exists. And so this report has great data in it that really can inform instructional practices in our public schools. And it's so very important. I would really love to see this SACE report used in school improvement plans within public school districts. So if we could get these in, if you're working in a county, if we could get these into the hands of principals, Mr. Jeremiah Moore, if you could help us with that. If we could get this report into the hands of principals in your district, just so that they could use them in their school improvement plans. And if they could use them in their school improvement plans, that would guide some of the instructional strategies that they were designing to inform some practices. So if all of us could take some ownership in doing it that way, I think that would be great.
Yes, ma'am. And what I'll actually do is I'm going to print this off, and then we have a principals meeting on Tuesday of next week. I'll go ahead and pass that out, and also give a personal copy to Dr. Carr and say this is instrumental work that SACE has been involved in, and this needs to be included, especially when we look at our school demographics. So I'll start there, and then I'll see what happens. But I'll definitely put it in the hands of everybody on Tuesday.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Or even or even use Dr. Connie as a resource.
Yes.
I would say you have to be careful in that area.
Yes, ma'am.
But we certainly want to advocate for our counties using them as in their school improvement plans. A lot of people don't even know the report exists, and so I really want us to all, really be voicing and be vocal about the report, because it's great data.
This is Dorothy Yates again.
Mm-hmm.
In the past, each of our SACE representatives have worked in conjunction with their tribal leaders or their urban association leaders and asked for a time to share at the tribal council meetings or at the Title VI parent meetings, and to share this data with each of our tribal leaders and parents. So I think that would be a good practice for us to continue in making an effort that we as SACE representatives make an effort to make our own immediate areas aware of the report.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ms. Dorothy.
Dr. Locklear, could it be like a potential possibility for maybe people that work within these districts that we could ask for space, maybe in a principals meeting or something of that nature, and actually go over the report with the principals? Would that be a potential thing that we could work towards?
Absolutely.
Okay. Because if that's something that is of interest, what I will do is I'll actually reach out and advocate for a space on my behalf and say that I would love to do that. And I'm willing to partner with anybody if you and I could go, because of course you're well more versed in the language and the report than I am. But like there as a support and just as a figurehead to really stand and advocate for our district in particular, I would definitely be willing to open that door or try to open that door with the opportunities that I have. So I'll be willing to do that if that's something that we feel would benefit the collective.
Absolutely, thank you. And I think Dr. Connie has broken the data down by just Robeson County, so she does it from a Robeson County perspective and presents from that perception or perspective, rather than the holistic frame.
Gotcha.
So when I present it, I do it from the holistic North Carolina standpoint. So I think when others present, like Dr. Connie, when she presents, she does it just from the public schools of Robeson County perspective.
Yes,
but
ma'am.
if anyone wants to take on the ownership of presenting, I'm happy. Just send me an email. I'm happy to share the PowerPoint with you, which does include notes, and then you can just make edits for your county. So I'm happy to share my PowerPoint with anyone that wants to present the report.
Thank you, Dr. Locklear. That would be most helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you.
So Dr. Susan and I, Dr. Susan helped create the report. So thank you, Dr. Susan. So I'm happy to share. I don't have a problem sharing that PowerPoint. And it, like I said, it does include notes at the bottom of each slide. So just send me an email if you're presenting somewhere, and I'm happy to share the PowerPoint. All right, so Dr. Silver has updated it, so now we can save it and it shouldn't say draft, and we can start sending some emails to our folks.
And Chairwoman Locklear, we will take care of getting it out to all the Title VI directors and coordinators.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you. Anything else as it relates to the 2023 SACE report?
This is Amanda Farsard.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to say, obviously, thank you for all that you are doing for SACE, but I also wanted to state that the Chapel Hill Carrboro City Schools District will be having their first kind of pre-Indian education program meeting with 7 Native American parents next week, and I will be sharing the 2023 SACE report, and I will email you for the PowerPoint presentation in case they ask me to kind of give more specific details. So thank you very much.
Absolutely, no problem. All right, next on our agenda is our SACE advocacy agenda for the 2023-2024 session. So that is us kind of discussing some things that we would like to see on the agenda, some major things that we would like to see on the agenda for the next term. So that we can be strategic and consistent for advocacy and make it part of a standing agenda. So one of the things that we have done, we have added Representative Lowry to our agenda. He will be attending all of our SACE meetings to give legislative updates. And so I did want to discuss with everyone anything else that you guys considered major or minor that you would like to add to our SACE agendas that you would like to see as a standing addition to our agendas each quarter.
Chairwoman Locklear, I'd like to make a suggestion and see what the group thinks about it, if that's okay.
Absolutely, please proceed.
Yes. So I was thinking maybe from an instructional standpoint, potentially like every meeting giving some sort of like responsive resource to help or that correlates with some of that data. Like, for example, like it really was impactful and eye-opening to see today that for middle schools, they had the highest percentage in terms of short-term suspensions, but like maybe having an action item or an instructional piece that could correlate with that to decrease that. For example, talk about restorative justice practices or like what a responsive curriculum could be to help erase some of that or reduce it. So essentially, I guess what I'm trying to say here is maybe some sort of item that's instructional in nature that could be implemented on the school level to help alleviate some of these issues that we are seeing in the data. And I'm not exactly sure how it would be worded or how we want to funnel it through the agenda, but I think it would be really, really instrumental to have something that's actually practical and applicable to like give to our districts and counties to use to help with some of this data that we are seeing. So if that's something that we're interested in, I can actually start working on that and contribute that to the group if everybody's interested.
Thank you. I've made that note. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other ideas?
Dr. Locklear, this is Stacy Lynch. I was wondering if we could maybe make a space or platform for programs to share the best practices or challenges like the Indian Ed program throughout the county. Maybe about 1 or 2 programs could present at each meeting so we can know what other programs across the state are doing as well, other than just Robinson County and Carmelite.
Okay. Thank you. So we could highlight a program at each meeting.
Yes, ma'am. I think that would be wonderful if we could add that in. I don't know what everybody else would agree to.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it was nice to see that at the summit, those programs being highlighted. Thank you. Anything else? Okay.
Dr. Locklear?
Yes.
How many programs do we have? Is it 4 in our state?
How
many Indian Ed programs, I guess is what I was asking.
18.
18. Okay. That's way, that would, I think, yeah, adding something, a highlight reel for each one to a meeting would be a most excellent way to top off or put a positive spin on some of this data that we're seeing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And as we do that, we certainly won't. As we do that, I want to think about a way that we make this critical, in that we're still advocating. Of course, we want to highlight it. We want to talk about the need for these instructional practices. We want to support teachers, but we also want to use our voice in a way to elevate and advocate as well. So let's think about that spin as well as we're thinking about highlighting these initiatives. Anything else? Okay, so nominees for SACE have been approved by the North Carolina Commission of Indian Affairs, and they'll go for the state board for joint approval in July. At the first quarter meeting for 2024, we will welcome both outgoing members and recognize them, and incoming members and swear them in, and then transition over to the 2023-2024 SACE membership. I did have one other thing that I wanted to possibly discuss. An issue has been presented regarding a textbook North Carolina purchased that included incorrect information about North Carolina Indians and tribes. It was brought forth by Kara Stewart, a member of the Saponi tribe with Native Educational Equity Consulting and a board member of the United Tribes of North Carolina. The publisher is Gibbs Smith. The writer is George Warren. It is claimed that he took bits and pieces of information from online sources and published it without the information being verified by American Indian Scholars, SACE, or the North Carolina Commission of Indian Affairs. It said the information was incorrect and not factual, and that parts of the article were condescending. Ms. Stewart indicated that Gibbs Smith, editor in 2021, was confident that the textbook would be adopted by the North Carolina Textbook Commission despite the inaccuracies. SACE did advocate and was instrumental, along with Mr. Greg Richardson, Dr. Olivia Oxenine, in getting someone appointed to the Textbook Commission. We do have Ms. Shannon Brayboy that was appointed to the Textbook Commission, and she does sit in that seat and serves on that Textbook Commission. But I did want to share that information. If anybody has any insights, Ms. Dorothy, if you have any updates concerning that.
This is Dorothy. I do not have any updates, but I would love to hear from Shannon Brayboy on this topic.
Yes, I did reach out to Ms. Brayboy via email to see if she could join us. I did not get a response back from her. I did reach out to her to see if she could join us to give SACE an update as it relates to this. But I did want the information out there. Did want to share it with SACE just so that everyone's informed. Are there any questions? All right. So, are there any announcements from any of our SACE members?
Not an announcement necessarily, but I did want to highlight that Robinson Community College had an ACES conference a couple of weeks ago. It's actually been like 3 weeks ago. And that was a very well done event. So, and I'm not advocating necessarily for ACES, although I think ACES is awesome. I am advocating for RCC, actually, in that they did a really good job at this conference. So if anybody has an event that they're getting, that they're thinking about and looking for a venue, I highly recommend looking at Robinson Community College.
Thank you, Mr. Calvin. Any other announcements?
I would like to make an announcement. NetNail now has an online raffle. There's way over 20 items at $5 a ticket. They're raising money to help the students go to the National Unity Conference in Washington, D.C. this summer. So if you happen to go to NetNail page, they have different payment options set up that you can send in Cash App or Venmo. I believe they have Zelle too. I'm not exactly for sure. But purchase raffle tickets if you want to make a donation or just want to share that post so we can bring awareness that the students are trying to raise funds for that conference this summer.
Yes, awesome. Thank you. Any other great happenings that we want to share?
Do we have that NetNail website?
I always see it on Facebook. I think it's linked on Facebook too.
Yes, I just have it on Facebook as well.
Yeah, they have a group on Facebook.
Okay, I'll look there. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I'm gonna be one of their chaperones at their conference.
Oh, awesome. That sounds like fun.
I'll let you know.
Miss Stacy, isn't there also like a NetNail Weebly that Dr. Leslie creates that could be shared? Or that might have just been last year's. I don't know about this year's conference, but if that Weebly could be shared, that might help too if that information was on there.
Yeah, somebody Richardson just put that in the chat. There's a NetNail Weebly.
Perfect. Okay, great.
Yep, and the link's included in the chat too, Mr. Calvin. All right. I always appreciate you guys joining us. I appreciate the value that you bring to SACE, the commitment and dedication you bring to improving the lives of American Indian students. I value each of you. I appreciate each of you. Later on this summer, we will be sending out a doodle poll for dates for our upcoming SACE meetings. So we'll be looking for that as well. If there are no further announcements at this time, may we get a motion to adjourn?
I apologize, Dr. Locklear. Just one thing I want to note. SACE members whose terms are ending this quarter, we'll be inviting you back for the first meeting so that we can formally recognize you at a face-to-face meeting. And the members who have been nominated or who have been moved forward by the Commission of Indian Affairs, the process is they are then jointly approved by the State Board of Education, and they will be going to the State Board in July. So we'll be having kind of a dual meeting in September with the outgoing members and the incoming members, recognizing those who are outgoing and swearing in those who will be coming on.
Thank you, Dr. Silver. If there are no further announcements, may we get a motion to adjourn?
This is Dorothy Yates. I make a motion we adjourn with no further business.
This is Rhea Jacobs. I second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? So moved. Thank you all and have a great Friday.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
Why? What does it matter? Minute. She hadn't done the thing yet.